Hey folks, today I'd like to take a look at the horoscope of Matthew Perry, who played the role of Chandler Bing on the extremely popular sitcom Friends, which lasted for a decade. So, Matthew Perry probably doesn't need much of an introduction, so I'll make short shrift of it right here. He was born in America, but his parents separated at a very young age for him, and he moved with his mom to Canada and grew up and went to school in Ottawa, and then later moved to LA to join his dad, and renew their relationship, and also to pursue his acting career, which quickly came to pass. And after a number of bit roles and appearances, and everything that was going on in television at the time, he uh, was cast as one of the six principal characters in Friends. And the rest, as they say, is history. And so it ran from 1994 to 2004, was extremely popular, and he was very well paid. Towards the end of that run of the series, each of those principal characters were getting $1 million per episode. And so, as a consequence, Matthew Perry made quite a lot of money in his lifetime and actually died with a net worth estimated at something like $120 million. So there are all kinds of things we could explore in his horoscope, and there are some mysteries there, of course, vis-a-vis his career and his professional success during Saturn Dasha, where Saturn occupies the 10th house but is debilitated, sort of a contrarian development from what we might expect. But what I really want to talk about is the whole issue around substance abuse and addictions, which was a defining behavioral characteristic for him, and of course was contributory to his poor health and probably ultimately his death. So, without further ado, let's take a look at that horoscope. So, here is the horoscope in question. Matthew Perry was born 19th of August 1969, 4:47 in the morning in North Adams, Massachusetts, quite close to Williamstown, Massachusetts. On the whole subject of addictions, illness, and that sort of thing, whether it be physiological or psychological or emotional malaise, there is often, in terms of root cause analysis, we can go back to the manas. Now, the manas is a Vedic term in psychology, which refers to that part of the mind which is responsible for the regulatory activities of the body. But it includes all of the sense perceptions, sight, sound, taste, smell, and touch. And as a consequence of sense perceptions, it is a precursor to the development of personality, because what you see, hear, taste, touch, and smell develops, the entity develops likes and dislikes, and thereafter in life pursues that which it likes and seeks to escape that which it doesn't like. So it starts off first with the sense perceptions and the body's reaction to those things through the filter of the manas, which is that animalistic portion of the mind that governs those faculties, along with the autonomic functions of the body, regulation of glandular activity and other things that sort of go on within the body without our awareness. Think of the operating system of a computer, while the manas functions in that regard as an operating system for the body. So, if that is afflicted, it can set up a kind of a jeopardy, if you like, that can then open the door to physiological, emotional, and psychological aberrations of some kind, and out of that arise behavioral problems and physiological problems, illnesses, and crises of one kind or another. So How do we examine the manas in the horoscope? Well, this is the abode of the fourth house. And so the protocol for analyzing that is start with the Lord, because although there may be occupants and aspects upon any given house, we always start with the Lord because there always is a Lord, although there may be absent of occupants or aspects, but there always is a Lord. So this the fourth house for Matthew Perry is Libra. So the Lord is Venus. So Venus has gone to the 12th house. So right away, this is one of the sort of red flags, if you like. When the Lord of the fourth house goes to any of the Trikashtanas, 6, 8, or 12, this poses an immediate problem. So Venus has gone to the 12th. That is a problem. Then we look to see whether Venus is afflicted, particularly by Saturn or by Rahu Ketu axis, both of which are, deregulating or crazy making or destructive or problematic in some regard. So with respect to Venus, it is aspected by Saturn. Now, Saturn in Perry's horoscope is debilitated. So you might think of the Saturn as being more virulent or problematic or irregular or unpredictable than, some well-conditioned Saturn. So Venus has an issue here as Lord of the fourth, gone to the 12th and under the affliction of Saturn. Then we look at the occupant, any occupants of the fourth house. Now, in this case, it's the moon, and you might say, well, moon gets digbala in the fourth house. Isn't that good? In this instance, as we'll see, not so good. So the moon occupies the fourth. What's more germane at this point is to ask ourselves, is this a weak or a strong moon? Now, as it happens, the arc between sun and moon is 72 degrees. That's right on the edge of the category wherein we were. In fact, it's just under 72 degrees. So this would be a very marginal judgment, but we could call that a marginally malefic moon because it is dark. If it's within 6 tithys, that is 72 degrees of the sun, which in this case is just under that 72 degrees. But this is a moot point. That's not the big deal. There lies the moon, relatively dark. The problem arises because it is aspected in a full mutual aspect by Saturn. And again, we have this, problematic influence of the prime malefic, Saturn. And not just in any condition, but debilitated. So that too is problematic. Then the other factor is for any planet that is either the Lord of the fourth or any occupant of the fourth, if they, never mind the aspects or association of Saturn or Rahu, which are problematic, also if the planet occupying, if the fourth Lord or any planets in the fourth, if they occupy a sign of Saturn or they occupy a nakshatra of Saturn or Rahu, that too is problematic. So we can get the influence of Saturn and Rahu Ketu axis coming from various directions: association, aspect, or in the sign or nakshatra of. Now we know Rahu doesn't own any signs, so we're not going to be finding that. But in this case, look at this moon. It is in this, basically the middle of Libra. And if you know your nakshatra ranges, you know that Rahu owns that swath of all air signs between 6 degrees 40 minutes and 20 minutes. So this moon is in a Rahu nakshatra. It's aspected by Saturn and it's in a Rahu nakshatra. So then we examine the fourth Lord, Venus, gone to the 12th, aspected by Saturn. We look at the occupant of the fourth. That is a relatively dark moon, which is aspected by Saturn and sits in a nakshatra of Rahu. Everything relatively problematic so far. The final thing is to look at the karaka for the manas. And in this instance, it is the moon. And so we're kind of looking at the moon all over again. First, because it was coincidentally a occupant of the fourth, but now we're looking at it as Karaka as well too. And again, we're going to say the very same things. Under the influence of Saturn in a nakshatra of Rahu and being relatively dark as well. So all three of these litmus tests, if you like, we've done one for Venus, the Lord of the fourth, and we've done the moon twice. Once because it was the occupant of the fourth, and the third time because it is a Karaka for the fourth. So then we've ended up with all basically negative indicators for the integrity of the manas. That sets up some sort of a predisposition. Now, looking at Moon and Saturn, a relatively dark Moon and a debilitated Saturn, although this does form a yoga, Dharma Karma Adipati Yoga, combination of Lagnesh Moon and 7th Lord Saturn, that is constructive in some respects in terms of, outreach to relationships or even one's contact with the public. And certainly, in his role in Friends, he played the role of a friend in the show. And of course, he was much loved by his fans worldwide. But Moon under affliction from Saturn can indicate a morose sort of disposition, prone to, deep thoughts, anxiety, the potential for depression. So all that's a little bit of a setup. But, people can, work the way out of such things if they have, recourse, avenues, and outlets. Incidentally, a Moon-Saturn combination in the Kendras, being the only planets here, are one of the partial signatures for public performance of some kind or another. And you see this in the horoscopes of, stand-up comics, actors of one sort or another, performers, artistic performers of some kind. A relatively common sort of pattern. And this was his way to, act out, that which he needed to express. But let's get to the addiction issue. So as many people probably know, substance abuse of some kind is usually found through an analysis of the second house. So if we look at the second house here, we see, well, Sun is Swarashi in its own sign, Leo. So first, back to the second house. The second house rules, among many other things, what goes in and out of the mouth. So although it, is a signature for speech, and actors, since the advent of talking movies, all actors speak, and that is one of the virtues of their acting ability, is to remember their lines and to be able to speak their lines properly. And many actors have a strong second house, because the second house rules both the voice but also the face. The head is house number one. The face is house number two. And so you'll often find actors and singers, vocalists and public speakers, etc., will have a very strong second house. So as an actor, he's got this strong Sun in its own sign in the second house. And that lends those abilities, either an attractive face or a good voice, to that whole role of acting. So far so good. The Sun is strong. But look what's going on. There's the Rahu-Ketu axis that runs through the second and the eighth house. Now, Rahu and Ketu have traditionally been associated with poisons and their antidotes, herbology, and any sort of foreign substance. And, in the strict notion of a Vedic or Ayurvedic regimen, you're supposed to be a vegetarian and only eat, basically what we would call clean and wholesome foods, from which, even meat would be excluded, and never mind alcohol or nicotine or any other substance. And it doesn't matter whether you eat it or drink it or snort it or inject it. It is all kind of a nurture or a substance that you are ingesting for your psychological or physiological need at that time. So we can see it all through the second house. So although the Sun is strong, Rahu and Ketu, its presence on the Rahu-Ketu axis is a contributory factor to effectively a kind of a poisoning. So that's one thing. Then the other is that Mercury is involved here. Now Mercury, is not combust, although it's very close to the Rahu Ketu axis. And for that reason alone, it will be judged a malefic. Mercury is a conditional malefic. We discount its association with the sun, which is so common. But if it's with malefics, and especially absent the influence of any benefics, Mercury will become a malefic. So in this case, Mercury is a malefic. But here's the key. So substance abuse is kind of set up here with the Lord of the second, Sun, in the second with on the Rahu Ketu axis. There is the adulteration of the diet and the possibility for substance abuse. But many people are able to have one or two social drinks every day or every second day or so on and so forth, or smoke cigarettes or whatever, and indulge in recreational drugs of some kind without becoming addicted. So wherein lies the addiction? There is almost always a 12th house influence. Why? Well, because the 12th house reflects the undoing of the individual, the dissolution of the identity, the sense of loss that the person experiences, getting out of their own skin, if you like, or disappearing, or effectively, escaping their identity, however much it would seem to trouble them. So the 12th house is almost always involved in addictions. So here, note that Mercury is the lord of the 12th. And it is associated with the Rahu Ketu axis, which makes it a malefic. And it's in the presence of the Sun, Lord of the second, in the second house, which then influences one's appetite for substance. And because Rahu and Ketu are there, you get substance abuse. Now, I dropped in that word there quite accidentally, appetite. But here's the thing. The sun in the sort of merge of Jyotish and Ayurveda, the sun is a significator for Agni, the digestive fire, the capacity to consume things, whether to deal with your hunger and to be able to manage it by, digesting that which you consume. So notice this, from the ascendant, we have the sun is a very powerful planet, a fiery planet, a planet of considerable Agni in the second house, the digestive fire. The interesting thing arises here as well, in terms of confluence, is that if you move over to Chandra Lagna, treating the moon as if it were the ascendant, from the moon's position, notice in the second house, oh my goodness, we have another powerful planet. Coincidentally, Mars, very much like the sun, both Pitta planets, high energy, fiery, powerful Agni. So from Chandra Lagna as well, we get this Mars, strong Mars in the second house from the moon, which again is that sort of, fire of digestion, and it can fuel a person's appetite. So, it really, arises principally from what we call Udaya Lagna, which is the natural ascendant, the intersection of the ecliptic with the constellational band. So that's where it starts, but I only refer to Mars in the second from the moon as a sort of a corroboratory influence. So there you have it, the substance abuse theme created by Rahu Ketu on the axis, Sun, Lord of the second, on the Rahu Ketu axis in the second house, and then the addictive quality enters in because Mercury is Lord of the 12th, becomes a malefic in the presence of Rahu Ketu, and then just fuels that entire fire. So, over the course of his life, Matthew Perry, was an early adopter of substance. He was doing heavy drinking by the time he was 14. This was in his Jupiter Dasha, coincidentally, Mercury Bhukti. And, so as I talk through this, it will be amazing how often the Mercury Bhukti turns up as being, a pivotal Bhukti in this, addiction cycle. So he started drinking at a very young age, and presumably that probably continued throughout his teens and into his 20s. And so he joined the cast of Friends in 1994. And reading up on him a little bit more in the past couple of days, he said that was when his drinking started in earnest. In 1994, he would have been 25 years old. And so he went from there with significant drinking onto the use of cocaine and whatever else was available to him. And it only became worse. In 1997, he had an accident with a jet ski, badly injured himself, and at that point started taking Vicodin for pain relief. Interestingly enough, this was in Saturn Dasha. He began his whole Friends career right at the outset of Saturn Dasha. But a couple of bookdays later, Saturn Mercury, he had this accident and started taking Vicodin. But it quickly spiraled out of control because of the addictive nature of his personality and, in all fairness, the addictive nature of Vicodin. And so he said at one point he was taking up to 55 doses of Vicodin a day. And he lost a huge amount of weight. He was down to 128 pounds at one point. And then around age 30, he suffered alcoholic pancreatitis, which arises as a consequence of significant alcoholic abuse. His pancreas was basically destroyed. This happened in Saturn Ketu. Again, we're back to one of these key planets that is contributory to the alcoholic abuse. And with coupled with the sun, the consumer of such stuff, and Mercury, the planet kind of contributing to the addictive quality of all this as well too. So things were really really bad after about 3-4 seasons of Friends. And at one point, he had to take a time out from shooting the Friends sitcom because he had to go into rehab for a couple of months. Interestingly enough, this was in Saturn Dasha Venus Bhukti. Why is that interesting? Because Venus is in the 12th house. What is the 12th house? The 12th house is the place you go for recovery and rehabilitation. It's either a hospital, a mental institution, a prison, an ashram, or a rehab facility in his case. Coincidentally, the Dasha Bhukti sequence here is, firing on all 6 cylinders. Later on in 2018, and this is quite a few years later, so the Friends sitcom lasted for a decade, from 1994 to 2004. And after that, he did any number of movies. But he kept on drinking and he kept on, using drugs and both prescription medicine and, recreational drugs, and suffered, one crisis after another. He ended up being hospitalized with gastrointestinal perforation and nearly died in 2018. This was in Mercury Dasha and probably in Venus Bhukti. And again, ironically, the 2 planets that are associated with, addictions. One is Lord of the 12th, the other one is occupant of the 12th. And, he was lucky to make it out of that. A couple of years later, he ended up in Switzerland in another crisis and flew back and forth to America, in pursuit of drugs to sort of pull him out of the situation that he was in. Over the course of his lifetime, he had apparently something like 14 surgeries. He was in and out of rehab 15 times. He was in therapy twice a week for 30 years. So this is a huge amount of therapy. It was not for lack of trying. He said he went to 6,000 alcoholic or Al-Anon Al-Anon or Narcanon meetings, 6,000 meetings. So in a way, he put in the effort. But the the karma in his horoscope, which is, you would say relatively fixed here because you've got Sun, Mercury, Ketu, all in the fixed sign of Leo. Rahu, of course, is in a fixed sign Aquarius. Mars, the other powerful Agni, consumer, if you like, also in a fixed sign. So he had a lot of fixity in his horoscope, and on the surface, yeah, can that indicate fixed karma? It's contributory to it. Where we, vocalize, the observation of fixed karma is when you have many sort of observations all leading to the same conclusion. And, that's the Sun on the Rahu Ketu axis, Mercury, 12th Lord, on the Rahu Ketu axis. Sun and Mars, both powerful second house lords from the point of view of Udaya Lagna or Chandra Lagna. When they all sort of suggest a similar thing, that is what we mean by fixed karma. The fact that many of these planets, or all that I've talked about in this last statement, happen to be in fixed signs, well, it sort of etches it just a little deeper. At one point, just last year, he said he was in an interview and bit into a piece of toast, and a whole bunch of his upper teeth came out in his hand. He put them in a baggie and rushed off to his dentist to get them put back into his jaw. And again, this would be deterioration as a consequence of, very significant drug abuse. And when the teeth go, it's often a sign that, serious health conditions are, pressing hard upon you. Okay, so this is a grim subject, of course, but it's important to recognize the precursors for illness lie in often a disturbed manas, which I'll just briefly, you find by examining the fourth lord, occupants of the fourth, even aspects upon the fourth in the absence of an occupant, and the moon is karaka. So it's a threefold analysis: the lord, the house, and the karaka. And then substance abuse, of course, is seen through the second house with malefic influence, and especially Rahu Ketu, and then addictions with 12th house influence. And they're all here in this particular horoscope. So, the reason it's not a savory topic, but it's important for, Jyotishis to recognize the protocol and how to see this. Perhaps you see this in a friend or a family member. It's worthwhile knowing about so that you can advise the person appropriately. Okay, that's a wrap on the horoscope itself. Okay, a few concluding comments. My intention for this YouTube discussion was really about the whole substance abuse and addiction issue. Although I did allude to, his chart is a little bit of a mystery vis-a-vis the fact that he enjoyed such a stellar career, especially during the period of the Friends franchise. But, he did many other movies after that. But so his whole career really started in his Saturn Dasha. And I didn't really pursue that in the horoscope, partly because I didn't want to have to put up the harmonic charts, but I'll just, the divisional charts, but I'll just mention that very briefly here now, and you can look at this on your own. So if you look at in the Navamsha, for instance, his Saturn is in the ninth house. It's aspected by Jupiter and the Moon, both benefics. And so that is sort of a very, very generic indicator for, sort of a successful period. Typically for relationships, but, in this instance, it may have been relationships with, the cast of Friends and the many other people, and relationships that he would have developed during that time. Career-wise, we typically look at the 10th harmonic, the 10th divisional chart, the Dashamsha, for career success. And in his D10, Saturn does occupy a positive neutral house, the second house. and it is in association with Jupiter, which is, the prime benefic. And there is no influence whatsoever from malefics. So that is certainly contributory to success during the Saturn dasha vis-a-vis career. And basically, this is the way we look at any sort of department of life, aside from the Rashi chart, the main horoscope. We must also look at the divisional charts as well for a view into those specific departments of life, whether they be relationships or career or children or money matters or whatever. There's a divisional chart for each of those. But as I say, I wanted to just cover this discussion with the use of the Rashi alone and not present the divisional charts, but you can have a look at them separately. The virtue being that his horoscope appears to be very accurately timed, 4:47 in the morning, and all of the dasha bhukti events that I discussed. Well, certainly in light of the development of substance abuse themes, addiction, the sessions in rehab and or hospitalizations, they all link up, quite neatly with those key planets, in this case, Sun, Rahu, Ketu, Mercury, and Venus, respectively. Okay, that's really it for now. Thanks for listening. Come back again for more of this. Thanks.